Myself and Leon are going to talk about critical path management. There's a wonderful view of the Miami skyline there. This is just to let you know, this presentation was first done for the ASAP user group this year. In fact, only a few weeks ago.
Yep.
ASAP is very well worth attending. It's a 3.5 day conference. It's actually referred to as ASAP University now. So rather than being a sales pitch or just talk about the new features, it's actually got classes to teach you different features and bits and pieces, and we will shape the curriculum based on feedback from the customer base. So what people want to see, we'll write a class for it, and it'll go on there. TWSuser.org. Visit the site. I think you should be able to see some of the presentations from there as well. And they will be announcing very soon where next year's conference will be.
Most likely Arizona,
Not Vegas.
Never Vegas. It's one place it can't be. Because many companies will not send any of their customers, any of their staff to Vegas. So it's the one place it will never be.
They'll never come back.
Yeah. Suddenly lose me.
Did you find Vegas adjacent sites?
Yeah.
Okay, now I've got a problem. Come on, get that out of the way. Everybody knows what ASAP is.
There's a truck there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I need to be able to see what's on there.
Oh,
Can I get rid of that? Yeah. Hang on. Hide floating. Yes, hide window.
You get a chance for the certificates and things.
Okay, I'll stand up. I feel better standing up somehow. Yeah, okay, so we're going to basically talk about, it's often known as workload assurance or workload service assurance, and it's basically the SLA management feature of ZWS, TWS, IWS, whatever you want to call it.
more automation.
Yeah, the whole thing. And we're not just going to talk mainframe or distributed, we're going to talk both. So there's myself. I've been 39 years now since I started with OPC. I'm Dean Harrison, work for HCL, and we've got Leon.
Leon Odenbrett, I've been working with it for a long while, since '96. So,
So,
what is workload assurance? Well, before we answer that, I wanted to real quick. Why is SLA monitoring so important? I came from, as you could have seen on the previous slide, first Best Buy and then Disney. And at Best Buy, they were a retail store. And they had one job that ran through TWS every night that sent all the data from, not data, all the credit card sales from Best Buy to the credit card companies. If they did not send it by 12:05 a.m. CST Central Standard Time, they would be fined over $1 million. Okay, so it was super important that they got it done, finished before 12:05. But it was super important that they ran it as late as possible because they had close to 1,000 stores running, and every store is collecting sales and credit card stuff. And so the longer they can keep that window open and collecting sales and then send it all at once, the more money they made. So we were one of the very first companies. We're way back when we implemented workload insurance, and we used that to monitor. And we were able to keep the company. They never ever got hit with the fines for running too late, and they also maximized the profitability by running it as late as possible without pushing that 12:05 time frame. So I wanted to mention it because why is SLA management so important? Why is workload assurance so important? Because it saves money and makes money for your company.
okay, so what is a critical path? We've got some options. It could be Simon Cowell's driveway, perhaps. Oh, we've not got the sound effects. Never mind. The last jobs your customer says are urgent. Yeah, no. The flow with the most jobs in it. A lot of people think that might be no, not that either. The flow with the longest jobs in it. No, not that either. It's actually the flow with the shortest slack time. Yay! So, you want to do this one?
Workload assurance is, you guys can read that. It just essentially, it's an optional feature that permits you to identify critical jobs and monitor them from end to end. When I say critical jobs are defined as the last job in the series. I understand all of them before they're critical. I've asked Marco to change the name of this multiple times now. Not critical jobs. We want to call them SLA jobs, whatever. Critical, everything's critical, and everybody's yelling at you to make their jobs critical. But that's what it includes, and it will flag everything prior to it.
So we mentioned the term critical endpoint job, endpoint being very good. So what is your critical endpoint job? Well, it's certainly not all of them. You might like to think that a critical endpoint job will be the jobs that handle your salary and the likes. Maybe the last job in the batch flow. No, that's not it either. Whatever the customer says, that's probably the last thing that you want to make as a critical endpoint job. Strictly speaking, a critical endpoint job should be an end job with a deadline that is enforced by a service level agreement of some point. That's really what you should be concentrating on. And one thing to avoid is having a critical endpoint job that is a successor indirectly on another critical endpoint job as well, because unless there are multiple SLAs at different points, it will manage all the points in between. And in fact, if you do have two critical endpoint jobs that are directly in some way dependent upon each other, you're actually doubling a lot of the processing going off for the dynamic recalculation that it does, because while you're still before the first of those critical endpoint jobs, everything is duplicated and recalculated twice. So, what has workload assurance ever done for us? Or, if you're of a Monty Python bent, what have the Romans ever done for us in the product? So we've got constant monitoring and prediction. So it's not a single point in time. It's keeping, when things change, it's recalculating, it's giving us fairly up-to-date stuff. It's adjusting things. So the critical path can actually change from one moment to the next. This might be the critical path here, and it might end up going a completely different direction if one of the other paths gets delayed and you start to lose this thing called slack time, and we'll come back to slack time later, I hope. Priority as well. When things start to slip, internally the priority of anything on a critical path will get escalated to urgent. Certainly on the mainframe side, it's referred to as urgent. I'm not quite sure how.
Does not do anything on the
Okay. All right. Hey, we're winning 1-0. It's also got escalation, and I know it doesn't do this one either. So we're about 2-0 for the mainframe. Anything that's already running on a mainframe can be escalated in WLM, so you can acquire additional resources. So when things get behind, your mainframe jobs can be made to run faster. We've got dashboards and views, so you can operate from a very high level point of view and see all your critical workload, whether it's good or not, drill down and the likes. And we can also see what your critical path is. Like I say, it can change from day to day, from minute to minute, really. And the product will let you see what actually is your critical path on any of your endpoints at any time. Okay, do you want to do this one or shall I?
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so I mentioned slack time. What is slack time? Well, essentially, and certainly from anybody that's known OPC for years on the mainframe side, it's certainly done most of this already for you automatically. It's always done this. It works out from all your time dependent jobs when it expects each one of those jobs to start by taking the planned start time adding to it the estimated duration, and sort of escalating that right down to the end. So it'll work out based on start times and estimated durations what time it expects things to be starting at. Equally, coming back from the deadlines, it does the same thing. It calculates what's called the latest start time. And that's basically to hit the deadline, when have I got to start by? So it'll subtract the duration, estimated duration, from the deadline to get the latest start time, and then inherit that backwards. So that last job there, we can see its latest start time is 21:45. So the two jobs in front of it must finish by 21:45. So you take their durations away from that to get the latest start time for each. Now, the slack time is quite simply the difference between the planned start time and the latest start time. By what we mean by slack time is how much time can you afford to lose and still finish on time. So we get this, you can see here, common assumption is, oh, it's the one with the most jobs. Well, we've got 3 jobs on the left, 2 jobs on the right, but the 2 jobs on the right, there's actually less slack time. So the critical path is actually the shortest physically of these 2 things. So don't always assume what your critical path is. There's a bit of calculation you need to do. And it does this all the time. So even if you've not set up the workload assurance thing, you can go into your current plan today, certainly on the mainframe, and have a look at all these predicted times. Just rely on good information in the first place, but we can come on to that as well.
And it does that on the distributed side also.
Come on, move. Anytime. There we go. So, you want to do this one?
Sure. So there are 3 levels of risk: red, yellow, green. Green means there's no risk, there's no problems, everything's running as expected, and we're going to finish on time. Yellow means that there's a potential problem, and that potential problem can be anything. And the nice thing about workload automation is it'll tell you in plain English what those potential problems are. Limit on the servers at 0, that the job's in a bend, that the job's running long, the job is started late, a bunch of other things that could potentially put your SLAs at risk. It'll tell you in plain English what is going on. And so it makes it very easy for you to handle. High risk. You're going to miss your SLA unless you do something. Your average run times, you're screwed. You're hurt, and you're going to have to either remove some jobs or write out a nice note to the people who own the SLAs and make sure they're notified ahead of time.
Yeah, and include your resignation with it.
Yes.
Just to mention here, we got a lot of people think, well, if a job's in error, shouldn't we be high risk? And the answer is not necessarily. So a job can be an error, and it still only be a potential problem if you are still before the latest start time for that job. So you know, as long as you manage to get it restarted before its latest start time, you can still be in the potential risk category.
One of my favourite things in the 5.4, if you sort by latest start time, then your most important problem is at the top of the list.
Oh, I wish I thought of putting that in this slide.
Okay, so now we're going to split into 2 channels. On the left-hand side, we've got distributed, sometimes distributed and mainframe. And on the right-hand side, we've got the mainframe because the mainframe's always right, so we're on the right.
We'll find out. So we'll start out here. How do you define which job is your critical job, which job is your SLA job? Inside the workload designer, there's a little button. Simple. Click it. You're done.
Yeah, and there'll be a similar button for the mainframe on the DWC as well. But on ISPF, it's still there. ISPF's going to keep on going. We've got under the operations list, select the operation, select option 4. It's in the automatic options panel. There's a field there that says critical. There's 3 settings. There's no, I can't remember what the other one is. Probably W, I think, for WLM escalation, and P for critical path. And if you set it to P, you have turned it on.
Sorry, is there any impact on performance to having long jobs?
Well, it does do a little bit more work because, well, I say it does a little bit more work. All of the calculations, by the way, if you didn't hear the question was, is there any impact on performance turning this on? If you turn it on as such, it doesn't do anything extra immediately because all of those times are calculated automatically. But what will happen is when things change, so if you change something on the critical path, so you restart a job or maybe modify, remove some operations or whatever, it will do a recalculate, but it'll only do a recalculate from the point that you did to the critical endpoint. So it does do a little bit of extra work, but only on exception. So ordinarily, all this stuff's happening anyway.
On the distributed side, I have seen companies that they run only 10,000 jobs. That's nothing. I mean, most people in here would laugh at 10,000 jobs. They do 10,000 jobs. Well, all our jobs are critical, so they mark all 10,000 critical. They crash their system.
Yeah.
Okay? Putting 10,000 jobs on as critical will crash your system. But if you put on the 5, 10, 15 jobs that are critical, it's still going to monitor nearly all 10,000. But they can't tell the difference. When I say they, the Unix or Windows monitoring team that's monitoring the performance of the master cannot see a difference in performance between normal and turning on a handful of jobs.
Yeah. And just to kind of double up on that, and I mentioned it earlier, is it's not so much the 10,000 jobs that was the problem. It's the fact that you've got jobs that are in the same line in the problem. So where I said when something happens and you make a change, it will do a recalculate for everything that's a predecessor to this critical job. But if there's another critical job downstream of the same job, it'll recalculate all of those as well. And if there's another one, it'll recalculate all of those again. So you get multiplied recalculations, and that's where you'll start to see a performance hit. When, you know, we have seen customers that, well, I say we've seen it on distributed, we've seen it on mainframe, critical endpoints. That's the big message.
You can still have a deadline within that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask.
You,
So,
you can have a deadline. So you've got your critical endpoint and you've got another job up here that's got a deadline. When it's calculating up, if this is more important than where it calculates, it will calculate up from there.
if you have a critical job set, no deadline, it's going to be.
It will have a deadline because it's always inherited from the job after it.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm not sure whether we cover it in this one. There is another presentation that we did before this at ASAP that talks about getting all your data in good shape. We'll share that as well because that's really useful. But essentially, you set the deadline on your critical endpoint and everything will inherit from that. If you have another deadline in the middle and that's more severe, it will then inherit from that. Well, depending on how you set. So there is something called ignore deadline, which will only follow the deadlines at the very end, if you want. We don't recommend that anymore because it conflicts with another new feature, the smoothing option, to push the non-critical stuff out. But there are ways and means, and so the other presentation explains how to set things up very well.
Just one quick question, Dane. If I was accessing a Z engine from the DWC and I flick that tab to critical, button, do I get the same options as I would in ISPF?
Yeah, it's not a button as such on the mainframe side. It's a little drop down.
Yeah.
And also, again, one thing's on the mainframe that's not on the distributor side. We can set the WLM service class. You can set this in 3 places. You can set it globally for your controller. So if you don't set one here and your thing goes into high risk, it will use the service class at controller level to escalate all your jobs. If you set it here in your critical end job, then anything that's upstream of this critical end job will get that class. Equally, if you specify it on an individual job, then even if it was set at the critical level, the individual job will override it. So for people that understand WLM better, occasionally you have a job that's of a certain different profile, that a slightly different service class will be more useful for it. You can set it at individual job level, critical path level, or controller level.
Quickly, there's a hand up in the WebEx. I'm not sure if someone's got a question.
Yeah. Yes, Chaitanya here. Sorry, I couldn't hear the questions properly. I don't know if someone has already asked this, but is that option of setting the SLA is access controlled or not? Because we don't want everyone to have that enable option for everyone, isn't it? It will create problems. It should be access controlled.
That can be set via your, I can't even think of the name of it. Your security options. Yes, you're able to turn it on and off. Now, once again, when I say you can turn it on and off, it's the screen that you see. So, am I going to allow person X into that screen? Yes or no? It's not that button.
Is that my sub-resource?
Right.
I don't think
Okay.
there's not a sub-resource on mainframe.
No.
So in case if they want to monitor the critical path, they have set the SLA right, but we want to keep that option enabled with admins. There is no such option. I mean, they can get into this screen, but they can't enable anything. It's just a read-only kind of thing is what I'm asking for. That's not available is what you're saying.
Is that on the Z side? That is correct.
Right. Okay. And one more quick question. I mean, when you said about the SLA monitoring, average times and all that, I'm sure that it is calculated based on the historical runs. And say, for example, if we set our history to 400, is it going to calculate the average based on 400 days of data available, or is it like we could customize that?
That is coming up.
Maybe, yes.
That is coming up.
The answer is
Okay.
different on mainframe and distributed, and if we don't cover it by next session, we'll cover it as an extra answer.
All right. Okay.
Okay, and this is something very specific to mainframe only, in that the critical job monitor is only enabled when the plan is extended or replanned with the critical operation already in the plan, which isn't obvious at first. So if you've not got workload assurance turned on right now, and you maybe just wanted it for things dynamically added, then when you dynamically add it, it will not be critical path managed until you do a replan or a plan extend. So what we recommend is that you set your current plan extend job as a critical job, because in theory it is a critical job, but that means you will always have at least one job in the plan that is set to critical, because you've always got the next critical path extend in the plan.
So
So
just use D and be safe.
we'll ignore that. Okay.
Well, okay, monitoring. This is very simple. As you can see on the left-hand side, you have the risk level. It shows you all the high risk. You can click on the word high risk and it'll tell you exactly what's wrong in plain English. Very simple, very easy to use.
Okay. And also in ISPF, as well as that on the DWC for mainframe, there's option 6.7, and that will show you all the critical endpoints as well. And you can see the risk level. It's almost the third column from the right-hand side there, RL. That will tell you what risk level we are actually at for this particular critical path. And you can select that job and it will show you the current critical path for anything that's not complete in front of that operation. Or if you put H, you get the hot list. And the hot list is when you're in a potential situation, and that will give you all of the jobs that might be affecting your critical path. So things are running longer than normal, or you've got a job in error that you need to deal with. Leon?
Okay. So monitoring also, if you'll notice that I have a few things circled here. As you scroll to the right on your monitoring of critical jobs, you have the number of jobs that are left in the critical path. Once again, it's determining it by the longest run from where you are to the end, or shortest slack time, same thing. It gives you the critical path remaining, how much time is left. If you have your stuff turned on correctly, this is very, very accurate. At Best Buy, we found that it was within a minute of being correct. And then estimated end time, that tells you plus or minus how many minutes, and that's very nice. So you can say, hey, we're going to be done at 4 o'clock, plus or minus 5 minutes, plus or minus 10 minutes. Very nice for you to be able to have. And then your deadline time tells you when it's expected.
And again, on the mainframe, as well as the DWC variant that you can use, because mainframes are connected to the DWC as well. I mentioned before the critical path and the hot list. This is the kind of information that's on there. I can't remember. I think you can scroll right as well on this panel, and there's some more fields available there. But this is the kind of thing that you'll see. So you can follow your critical path from the first job down to the last job.
So the first way that you can react to potential SLA breaches, and the way that most people do it, is through event engines. Our event engine is set up. You can select no risk, potential risk, high risk, and whenever anything goes into those levels, you can get an email, run a job, update resources. As you get on the mainframe does automatically, we can set it up to automatically add more servers to give you more horsepower for your SLA path, if that is what is needed.
And because mainframe is typically discipline separated, we don't have an events engine in the same way in the product on the mainframe side. You would use your system automation product, be that system automation, Ops MVS or whatever, to track this little set of messages. So this will tell you when a job's been escalated to potential or high risk, and when they've been reset backwards. So if you're exporting this out to an off mainframe monitor, you can actually you can highlight problems, and then when they're resolved, you'll get a message come back that you can go back and turn the alert off and things like that. So those 4 little messages, they are your friend as far as trying to integrate this with console management or any off mainframe reporting process. They also, I believe, get forwarded through common data provider. So if you're using Splunk or something else, we can forward them on that way.
Neil, you have a question?
Yes, just want to check if this presentation will be available.
Yes, we intend sharing it. Yeah.
Full presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll share this one, and we'll share the one that gives you more information on how to get all times and things set up.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Maybe we do that one at the next the next user group. Okay. Again, some mainframe only specific things. We told you there were frogs. We've made at least one frog in here. So this is, again, Leon said you could do this on distributed with event management. On the mainframe, there's some stuff that happens automatically. So once you get to high risk, all jobs on that critical path are set to priority 9, which means that thou shalt never code priority 9 in any of your applications. Otherwise, the mainframe's got nowhere to go to get around it. You know, you could have put it in there. So don't code 8, pick 8 as your highest priority. Don't use 9 because that's what DWS wants for itself. All jobs on the critical path can also be escalated to a new WLM service class. And I mentioned before, you can assign that at individual job level, at the critical endpoint level or controller level. But also, especially being as we've got those messages out there, the EQQCP messages, you can trigger adding some WAPL jobs in to do things like sacrifice jobs that can be skipped. So if you've got a block of jobs that you want to run every night, but if you're going to miss an SLA, you could miss them tonight, you can run a job when something goes to high risk or potential risk to mop those jobs, knock them out the plan. And you can identify them by using user fields or anything you like to say, okay, anything with this user field set to this value, mark it to NOP, and they won't run. At which point, recalculate goes on, and hopefully your critical path comes back into no risk.
Okay. How to accurately portray something. For example, you have a job that runs every day of the week. It's a payroll job. Mondays, they actually run payroll. So on Mondays, you need to know that it's going to run for 20 minutes. But every other day of the week, it runs for 1 minute because it's grabbing onto the 4 employees that were just hired this week. So, how can you ensure that you have your information for your deadlines and everything set up correctly? And that is through.
That's in another
Well,
presentation.
this is the next slide. I'm sorry, I'm one slide ahead. I apologize. This one here is on the how do you notify people? Your events have parameters that you can pull, and so you can grab onto things like the critical start time. So you can send out an email saying, "Hey, we're in trouble, and the critical you need to have this fixed by 2 o'clock, or we're going to miss our SLA. It's on you." And you can have all that information, your deadlines, your latest start times, your status, your job risk level, and all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry, I'm one slide ahead. Go ahead.
You're going to hit your deadline then, aren't you?
I'm going to hit it.
Yeah. Okay. And on the mainframe, we got some additional new alerts. They came in, I think, partway through 9.5. I think they came in as an SPE on 9.5. So you used to be able to just say, well, if I'm going to miss my deadline, tell me. But now we can have an action. We can say, well, what if I'm going to miss my operation deadline? And you can name an action. And I think there's you can do things like set it into error or issue a message for those. And then we've got 2 not started alerts. And this is one of the things a lot of people before workload service assurance came along, they'd have what I always refer to as milestone jobs, in that I must reach this job by this time or else. And a lot of people feel uncomfortable going away from that, even though the workload assurance process will inherently do the same thing, because it's telling you these are all the places you've got to hit by a certain time. But you can still put additional alerts in here now. So the old way of doing milestone alerts was you'd run a job at 10 o'clock that would do some form of process, maybe it be a list stat in BCIT or WAPL, and if the status was wrong, the job would go into error and say, hey, we got a problem. Well, now you can have a not started alert. In fact, you can have 2. So you can say, well, if it's not started by 10 o'clock, I'm just going to issue an alert. If it's not started by 11 o'clock, then maybe I can do a little bit more. And the little bit more you can do can be, you could knock this job. So if it's not started by 11 o'clock, don't run it tonight. So it's another way of getting rid of jobs, sacrifice them just for one night. But there's also another one that says not internal. And what that will do is it will say, I'm not going to run this job and I'm not going to run all the internal successors. So it basically will flush the rest of that application for tonight. It does mean you have to design your application specifically with that in mind if you want to use this feature, in that you wouldn't want something further down the application that you really do want to run. But it does allow you an easy way to help catch up. And equally, these alerts can also be used to trigger WAPL jobs to perform other actions.
Is there a D equivalent to those on-level alerts? So like currently in our D environment, we run check jobs at a specific time that will check the status of the job, and if it's not completed, it'll ever get called out. So is there a D equivalent when we wouldn't have to run a check job? We could just set it up and it'll alert automatically.
Mhm.
Okay. Would that be through the events?
Yes. And I probably could,
Let's see if we can time on it.
next time.
Yeah, take it online, but it'd be good to see that. I say we would check jobs at anything.
We're doing all right at the minute.
Yes,
We might be able to do some more on the end of this.
we also planned on do a demo. We didn't do that
No,
at
I know.
ASAP.
Okay, so see where we're going next. Reporting. Okay, this one's all yours.
This is all mine. On the DWC, there's a historical gather that you can turn on. You have to turn it on both the D and Z engines. But if you turn on reporting, your customers can see historical reporting and grab onto. Now, this is just a real quick one. I did not grab onto 400 days, but whatever your Opman LS is set to, you can have as many days as you want, or as few days as you want. But if you notice, it's all good, and it tells you if I didn't pull up the titles, I should have, but it also tells you if you're running behind. That yes, no is running behind, so you know if your SLAs are running behind. What?
I think that might be it for, yes, that's it for this one. Okay, so just go back to a question that was asked earlier about how we estimate the times. On the mainframe, there's something called limit for feedback, and that will basically say, okay, anything that's in a certain range of the current recorded time, we'll consider that to be part of keeping a new time and feeding that back to the database. The limit for feedback allows you to basically filter out occasions that have suddenly got to run massively longer than they did before. It's more of an art form than a science to try and get that set right. But and then from there on, you can say, okay, I've got a new time. How much of the difference do I want to take? Typically, people will set that to 50%, which will say, well, we're going to take a running average. So in answer to the question of how far back does your running average go, it goes as far back on the mainframe as since you turned on the process to do it at 50%.
On the distributed side, we have a smooth process also, and it takes your average run time. But as I started mentioning, and I thought it was on these slides, but it was on the previous
It's on the other ones, yeah.
there's something called advanced analytics that you can turn on. And what advanced analytics will do is it'll look, and as I said, you have that job that runs every Monday. You know it's going to be 20 minutes. It'll automatically adjust your average runtime to 20 minutes on Mondays. Or on the third day of the month, you have that. It will do that also on the third day of the month, or the first Tuesday, or if there's any kind of pattern, the third day after the full moon, or whatever it is. It does have the intelligence to figure that out. But if you turn on a ton of those advanced analytic jobs, you will crash your master. I suggest a handful. If you have more advanced analytic jobs and you have fingers, you may be running yourself into a problem.
And the equivalent on the mainframe side is that you can, if you've got something that say runs Monday to Thursday, maybe runs for 10 minutes. On a Friday, it runs for an hour and 10 minutes. Then there's a new feature that came in, again, partway through 9.5, I think, called variable durations and deadlines. And in there, you can put a pointer to a run cycle or a run cycle group to say, when this job runs on the day that this run cycle or group prescribes, then we use this duration instead. So your daily job will be scheduled with the time in the operation list, Monday to Thursday maybe, and then Friday you can have a rule and stick a different time in and it'll use that time as well. Also, getting yourself up to date really quickly and painlessly. I'm sure a lot of people out there have got durations that are absolutely wildly out. Couple of relatively new settings you can use. You can set limit for feedback in your system parameters to 0 for a period of time, at which point it will accept every new time as it comes through. So this is something you have to do as a reset your durations process, but for a period of time you can do it and it'll take every duration. So even the ones that were wildly misset. I mean, a lot of people may have things that were set to a duration of a minute that actually run quite a lot shorter because minute used to be the smallest time you could put in there. It'll adjust all those as well for you. And there's a new feature as well called first feedback, which is, again, it's an option you set in the JT ops. And that will say the very first time a job runs, I don't care what you put in the database, I'll use the first run time I get. After that, it uses the average times. So that gets you around the problem of your application developers have got no clue how long it's going to run in production. First feedback will take the first run as your starting point for you. And this is all in that other presentation.
Now, one thing that we didn't have in here that I regret not putting in, and it's 100% my fault, is there is something called What If. I don't know if any of you guys use What If, but especially for critical jobs, What If is really awesome in the sense that we're running behind. What can we clip? You click on the What If, you bring it up, you experiment around, you look to see what you can add, subtract, and then you hit apply and it takes effect immediately. So you can cancel dependencies, you can delete jobs, you can do all that stuff all in one shot. So that way you can rebuild your job streams as you need to on the fly to make it work correctly. And if there's one thing that I would suggest everybody here doing is teaching your operations staff how to use What If and getting them to use it, because it reduces the calls to me and I want to sleep at night.
And conversely, rather than using it as a reactionary tool, you can use it as a proactive tool. So say, for example, someone phones up and says, we're going to need to take this server down for 30 minutes at some point tonight. When will be the time that is best to take it down that has less impact? And you can go into What If and say, if this workstation is down between 10 o'clock and 10:30, it will show you what impact that has on your endpoint. And you might find you can move it far enough out that eventually you haven't got that many, you come to a point in time where it's predicted there's not much or anything on that particular workstation, and you'll see that you still meet your SLA, where doing it an hour earlier or an hour later might actually throw your SLA out the window.
Perfect.
We have 15 minutes.
What's the difference between the recalculation done in planning and the recalculation done in CPH?
It's smaller in that it only focuses on the things up to the end of the critical path. The planning does the whole plan. And a replan does the same thing as well.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that security question, and the trick that we usually talk about is putting the SLA times on the special workstation. You could then protect that workstation.
Yes, that is, yes.
And then you can use WAPL to make sure that there's nothing in the database that's marked any other thing other than that workstation.
Yeah.
There is a company. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Did everybody hear that? Because Anna's a fair way from the mic. What the suggestion there was for the mainframe to restrict turning critical path on is you could put it on a specific workstation, which you can protect with RACF, and then you can have part of your quality control process make sure that nothing gets promoted to production if it's got the critical path flag set on any workstation other than one that you prescribe, at which point you've guaranteed nobody has set that flag that can't set that flag, because only people with security to allow them to update that workstation can do it.
One company that I have worked with, what they did with their critical jobs that I love is every one of their critical jobs is actually a dummy job that runs less than a second. But they changed the name of them all. And, it's, payroll, SLA, accounting SLA, data warehouse SLA, whatever. But they're very descriptive titles. And the thing that's really cool about it is then they have that screen being shared on their company website, and the president and the pointy-haired bosses that don't know anything can look at it and actually somewhat figure out what's going on and see where they're sitting and know exactly which person to call instead of calling you. And they said that it goes a long ways to reducing the number of panic calls that they get. It goes out to the teams that deserve the panic calls and not you.
And I know Anna's going to suggest it, so I'll suggest it anyway. Again, on the mainframe, we do recommend that your critical endpoint job is actually on a dummy or non-reporting workstation, because all it needs to do is set up that deadline that everything else inherits. But give it a very descriptive name and make it begin with either a hash or an @ because then in any sort sequence, they'll come to the top of the list. So if you do what successes have I got to this job and sort that by workstation, you'll see, oh, this has got a critical endpoint behind it. I need to do something about that. Also, a lot of people say, okay, if my job hasn't started by its latest start time, then it goes into high risk. But isn't that too late? I'd like to know 15 minutes before something might go high risk, or 10 minutes before. Well, you can do that with something called transport time. Now, transport time is a very old feature of TWS on the mainframe, and it will basically, you used to use it when you were dispatching a tape to another site, and the transport time said this is how long it takes the van to transport it from one place to another. Transport time is taken into account on any predecessor relationship, but the rule is the dependency must be between two different workstations. So as long as you give your SLA operation a specific workstation for SLA operations, whatever it's dependent on will be a different workstation, and you can set a default transport time for your SLA workstation of, say, 10 minutes, at which point every calculated latest start time will be 10 minutes before the real latest start time, and give you all the alerts and everything 10 minutes ahead of when it's a real problem, not exactly when it's a real problem. And that's something you can fine tune. You can have different SLA workstations with different times on, or you can also set the workstation defines the default transport time. You can actually set the transport time in an individual dependency as well. So you can override the default. So there are ways and means you can tune these alerts as well.
One other advantage to workload assurance that I cover a lot with a lot of people is the fact that you can have in the middle of the night a server bounce, go down, recycled because it's supposed to be and they never told you. Whatever the case may be. And you're going to have 150 jobs in the bend status. Okay, now somebody has to restart all those. And it's not going to take 1 second or 1 minute to restart 100 jobs. It's going to take some time. And you have to do research to make sure you're starting at the right place, blah, 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 blah. How do you prioritize what you're doing? Using workload assurance, you can assure that you're going to restart the jobs on the proper server or on your critical path first, and then come back to the other ones. So that way you keep the critical path moving as fast as possible versus restarting them all, and maybe the last one that you restart is actually in your critical path.
And that goes back to what Anna suggested earlier in 5.4, the error handler on the mainframe, sort by latest start time. Your most important stuff then comes to the top.
And then the last one on, I think that's it on the workload assurance that I can think of off the top of my head.
Do we have any more questions, or do you want 10 minutes of demo?
I've got a quick question.
I just got a question. Yeah. So this is about the monitoring stuff or the alerting stuff which you just mentioned, right? I mean, this is not just with respect to the SLA monitoring, it's for the whole of TWS. Do we have any plans of implementing the direct integration with Netcool, like maybe SNMP traps or something like that? If not, then what is the best possible option to send the alerts to Netcool that is currently available with TWS?
Integration alerts with Netcool.
On Z?
UCI.
On anything. On CD or both?
Was the question?
So, sorry, I did not get that. Can you say that again?
Are you asking for distributed, mainframe, or both?
Distributed.
The alerts come into the normal merge log, so you can grab them out there. That's how we do.
That's what we did at SC.
Did you hear that?
No, I didn't. Someone else repeat it again, please.
You can parse the TWS merge log. That's a way.
Yeah.
You can also use event tool and contact using REST or a command line or the system. So you can propagate the alerts.
Yeah, we're currently using an automation. We have our inbuilt automation to enhance the alert that is coming in and probing it to or sending it to Netcool. Maybe I thought if there is a direct integration with Netcool, it will make things more easier than sending the entire log or something other than that. You know what I mean there?
No, there is nothing else.
Yeah, maybe this might. It would be better if we integrate because both are IBM products, and I feel it's something that we need to look into.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't actually a question for you guys. It was more the user. It's not specifically related to critical part of the SLAs, but it did make me think. So the criticality of jobs is defined by our customers. Like we don't necessarily know that they're running a plan. And it's become apparent to us that there's all of a sudden like P1 bridge, it's not marked as critical at all, and now they're saying it is. I'm curious procedurally, does anybody do job recertifications with their customers for the jobs? There's tens of thousands of jobs on these platforms. We have jobs. If I've got one job that's sending a financial buyer to somebody deep on, just curious if people do any kind of recertification process. Also, we don't want jobs that are just running. We want to keep these platforms running optimally. Is anyone doing that? It's a tricky one because you want to recertify tens of thousands of jobs. No one's doing it. No. Okay.
Okay.
On a semi-related topic, semi-related. Working at Best Buy, when we would run about 150,000 jobs a night, and we would have close to 1,000, between 1,000 and 1,500 events every night. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is way too high. Okay, so I started running the report. It's a canned report inside of Workload Automation. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head right now, but it's a canned report. And I just said, okay, show me anything that's bending over 80% of the time. And I printed out the report. I invited all the big head honchos to the meeting. And because of the way they did their naming standards, they knew, you own, this one, you own this one. And I handed out the report to everybody and explained what it meant. And those guys were merciless with each other. I mean, I'm talking to the CEO, not CEO, but the big board members. All of them were just merciless to each other. You let your guys have their jobs that bend 100% of the time. That's pathetic. And they just went back and forth. Within 2 months, we went from 1,500 bends a night down to under 10 in 2 months. Because we would meet once a week and hand out that report. And all of a sudden, they were on their guys saying, hey, fix this. And 90% of the time, what happened is somebody spelled the word exit wrong and exit 0. And because it's such a pain to go through the change management process to fix it, they just left it at a bend and they just said, oh, confirm it every night, And I was like, don't confirm it. We got to the point to where it's kind of recertification in the sense that the management got involved in the certification process.
Never underestimate the power of management by embarrassment. business-based league tables can do an incredible job to get things sorted.
But we are pretty much wrapping that up. If
Yeah.
unless there's more questions, we have Mark and Marco on the next one.
So I think it's an
It's Anita's thing, but it's
Yeah,
it's your name.
Anita's online. I think she's going to do it.
Anita's online and going to do it for us.
I was going to, but
There we go.